joints I'd been doing for years. But when I went to that practice, I felt great. And then after the first class, I went straight to the bookshop and I thought, I need to read more about this yoga because this is amazing. And I started reading. And then a year or two later, I went on a weekend trip from the yoga studio in Bangkok. I was then teaching at a university. And most weekends, I was very busy marking my students' essays. But this one weekend, there was a trip. And I knew that weekend I won't have essays to mark. So I'll join that trip. And it was to a beautiful green place. And the same very good teacher I mentioned, he was organizing the trip, but he'd invited a guest who he'd recently met. And this man was called Larry. And Larry was living in Bangkok. But Larry was a direct student of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in the 1970s. And he was age 15. Larry had told his parents growing up in the US, I need to go and study meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And somehow he managed to do it. And because he was so young, he got to spend about 4 years studying more or less most of the time with Maharishi in Switzerland and also in India. And during that time, he always heard Maharishi Mahesh Yogi speak about Swami Lakshmanju of Kashmir as the greatest living embodiment of a realized saint. And then years later in 1990, Larry was working in Los Angeles, but his job worked on the New York Times. So that meant he would start early morning and finish by early afternoon. And he got a phone call from a friend, a meditator friend, saying, Larry, Swami Lakshmanju is sitting in a house in Culver City, this part of LA. And so Larry was all excited. Well, have you got the phone number? And he said, yes. Have you called them? Not yet. Well, I'll call him, see if we can go and meet him. And the people said, yes, come and meet Swamiji. He is here, come in the afternoon. And because of Larry's work timetable, he was then able to go and meet Swamiji every afternoon during that visit. And he became his close disciple, and he went back to Kashmir with him and lived in Swami Lakshmanju's ashram for some weeks then, during which Swami Lakshmanju basically gave him a program for the rest of his life, Kashmir Shaivism. And so there it was this weekend. We've traveled out to a place called Kanchanaburi, very beautiful green place. And that evening, Larry gave a talk about yoga from the point of view of Kashmir Shaivism. And years later, he was joking, because since we've been to Kashmir together, but years later, so I always remember you, James, because your jaw was in your lap. It was just like, this feels like home, because it was this very inclusive, universal vision and very beautiful. And I just felt this deep resonance. And then from that time, I decided to, Adrian, he was running a teacher training program. I'd been teaching for several years, other things, languages mainly, and I coached basketball before, but I joined the training program, and Larry was giving satsang every Sunday night. And it was just absolutely magical, because he would give these amazing talks on a Sunday evening. And he was introducing lots of these foundational principles.
What would he talk about, James? What would his talks be about?
So he taught, for example, there was a whole section on karma bandhana and coming out of karma bandhana. And so the binding influence of action, how to deal with that. He also talked about the theory of sound in the Kashmiri system, and how that relates, how we relate to our reality, and how we can move from gross to subtle. Also on the course we were doing, Yoga Sutra was part of the curriculum. So we had a pretty thorough overview of the Yoga Sutra and the Vyasa Bhasha, the whole text. And then after that course finished, I continued studying with Larry for the next few years. So we would meet twice a week. And so we went through the Yoga Sutra again. We looked at some chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Larry taught us, the first Kashmir recitation I was taught was from Utpaladeva's Shiva Stotravali, the 13th hymn. And so then we got more into this Kashmiri vision and this juxtaposition of, let's say, Jnana and Bhakti. So Utpaladeva had these hymns that are just soaked with devotion, but he also has these other texts which are very pithy philosophical treatises. So the same, how this tradition unifies. And this other aspect of the Kashmiri vision, that it includes all the Vedic and all the Tantric literature. So it's very much this universally inclusive vision. So with Larry, we looked at Yoga Sutra, we looked at some chapters of Gita, and we looked at some of these Kashmiri hymns and texts, and then he taught me to do Kashmiri puja, as from that's when you had taught him. He also taught one thing that also was very beautiful. So Larry had spent all that time with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and with Swami Lakshmanju. So he spoke also about the Guru and shared, I mean, he shared these just beautiful stories from the tradition. And I think that was really my first direct experience of what I would then, and what other people from
Could
the
you
West
share
called.
one story, please? Could you share one story for us?
One story. Well, I can give it, I can tell you to illustrate the magic of what was happening. Yeah. So one in that group of people who were doing the teacher training, most of us learned to meditate with Larry. And the months went by and we were also studying. And so we'd been studying the third chapter of the Yoga Sutra, and which mentions all these, siddhis and all of that. And one of the students asked, this thing about being able to manifest things, is it real? Mm. And so Larry said, well, the thing is, it's happening right here. And he said, when I was studying with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, he said, we will make these teachings available and then people will come. And he said, look, and you have come. And then he said, but for example, he said, as you practice yoga, and when you practice meditation, your life will become sweeter and richer, but you won't realize it because that's just the natural way. It's just things will become easier and you won't realize it unless you stop meditating. So as you start to invite this experience of integration into your day-to-day, your life will become a little bit more integrated, things will flow. And so as you align with, let's say, Rita, and you're living more in rhythm and harmony, you will get more done in less time. Things will happen with less effort. And so he gave the example. He said, say, for example, if you wanted to, people talk about manifesting a mango. So he said, the yogi is practicing and you're meditating and you've been taking your awareness to that source of cosmic consciousness day in, day out. And you have the thought, oh, it would be lovely it's the mango season. It would be lovely to have some mangoes. And he says, maybe you don't make the mango sprout from your palm like a magician, but maybe then your friend calls by and says, oh, I was just at the market and had these beautiful mangoes, and so I thought I'd bring some for you. Mm. And he said this in the class. And at the end of the class, the studio owner's girlfriend came with mangoes.
Oh my.
And and everybody was kind of like, oh. And she never came to the class. She wasn't involved in the course, but she just thought, oh, all these people are there, and she'd been to the market, and the mango season had just begun, and so everybody's like, oh wow. And then in another of those classes, for example, he mentioned, when you start practicing and you start making a sincere effort to align your action with natural law, or with loka sangraha, nature will support you. So he talked about, people say, Kali Yuga, or the times we live in, it's very difficult to practice, but he said it's actually it's a great time to practice, because when you do make that effort, all of nature will rejoice and support you. And so he said, as you make the effort to come back to the center in the meditation practice, it will happen in your life that you will be a little bit supported. You'll be able to come back to a centered, skillful place more easily without even noticing it. The next morning I was traveling to work on the bus, and I was a little bit late. And I was getting off the bus and I was late. So I could have easily just jumped off the bus, but somehow I stopped and looked, because we've pulled into a bus stop, so there should be no traffic coming on the inside. But it's Thailand, it's a little bit like India. The driving culture is not so, it's a little bit different from in Europe. But anyway, I stopped And I just checked, and sure enough, a car just came flying by on the inside where it never normally would. But I hadn't consciously chosen to stop. I felt like somehow um, the impetus of the meditation practice of just being a little bit more present and less rushed, it wasn't, it, somehow I felt this, that influence is supporting me. And it
Is
was, I
there
just felt that
sorry to interrupt, is there a
yeah.
temptation to be satisfied with these siddhis and this sense of being a little more in control of life and just, be happy at that stage and stop there?
Well, this is a beautiful thing that Larry would emphasize when he was teaching, that, he said, so when we were doing that whole section of the Yoga Sutra, he talked about, the thing is, you practice and these new powers will come, so some way or another. It might not be the case that you can read other people's minds and you can teleport and you can jump over the building and all of that, but it might be that you will accrue new, like, different levels of power. And so Larry was very clear. He says, it will happen. You keep meditating. And, I had an experience years later. I was teaching the Yoga Sutra in Mysore, and I had a guy in the class, very smart guy, worked for Google, very high in like analytic capacities. And he said, we were studying Yoga Sutra, and he said, James, I'm really happy with my meditation, asana, pranayama practice. I'm not interested in all this flying in the sky and this going. Why do we have to even? Why is it even included? And so the way it was explained to me, Larry said, well, the Yoga Sutras is a manual. It's the, sometimes people read about these vibhuti and all of these amazing capacities, and they think it's like the fairy tale of enlightenment. And he would say, it's not, it's the practice manual of enlightenment. Everything in there, you can put it to the test. So all of chapter 3, these means to help a practitioner, if it's appropriate, make more subtle their awareness and access the things that need to be cleaned out, because the level of clarity to the surface, the things that are impeding one's true grounded integration. So he would say, maybe you're there and you're meditating in your room one day and suddenly you levitate from the floor. Now, if you don't know the theory of the text, you might think, oh, wow, now I'm a yogi, now I've mastered it. He said, that's why we have jnana and vijnana, the theoretical understanding and the experiential understanding, as two wings of the same bird. They're both required. And so he says, if that happens, that you accrue this power, say that you're meditating and there, the angels come and in your meditation say, oh, Aparna, we've been waiting for you. Tonight in the celestial realm, there is a party and the celestial Bharatanatyam dancers will be there. And we've got a front row seat for you. Larry would say, at that point, you say, well, that's very kind of you to offer, but I'm afraid I have other things to do right now. And you return to your meditation practice. So he said, the yogi, that's why we study, to know that these possible temptations may arise and what to do with them, to come back to the center and to keep grounding. So for me, this idea that, and Swami Laxmanju emphasized this a lot in his teaching as well, is that one talks about transcendence or one talks about rising, but the real practice is to integrate back into the root system. And so that was something that he emphasized a lot, about that need to always come back to the foundation, to always integrate back into the roots. And I feel that's just, so everything grows from the roots. To me, that's one of the beauties of the yoga system, is it's so down to earth and practical. It's about connecting to the elements, working with the basic building blocks of life in a very respectful way. So I think that is a temptation, but the way that the teachings were given to me was really about alerting oneself to that, and then taking care to keep one's eye on the bigger picture and the real aims. And that's something that in Larry's teaching, my first encounter, let's say, with the Indian tradition, like in the Gita, like at the very beginning when Krishna begins teaching, he starts talking about the ultimate, the soul, and so the way I understand this is we need to beware the valley of false enlightenment, and to recognize that if I'm fully established, it means I can stay steady come what may. And so this understanding of the yogin being the same, it doesn't mean that the yogi is like an automaton, but it means that the yogi is able to bring that same depth of presence to all situations. So when we're experiencing beautiful things, we can savor them, relish them without getting carried away. When we're in the face of terror or injustice, we can stay grounded and balanced, and so respond to that challenging situation as skillfully as possible. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you. So how do you take this learning back to the West? So how does your teaching, how did you take this learning to people who've not experienced what you did?
So the first yoga teaching I did was teaching yogasana classes, but the way I understand yoga is it's always about, like I say sometimes, there's no such thing as a physical yoga practice or a mental, intellectual yoga practice or an emotional yoga practice, because if it's yoga, it has to include. If we want to invite unity or togetherness, we can't leave any part of ourselves out. So if we're using asana as our lens of inquiry, we have to invite all our sense powers to be participative, to be nourished and regenerated in that practice. We have to invite our mental focus and concentration into the practice, because if it's not there, it can't be yoga. Similarly, if we're doing kirtan or we're doing some devotional practice, again, we have to concentrate and we have to use our physical and sensory capacities to give ourselves to that practice. So when I was teaching asana, from the beginning, I would invite as best as I could, not even in an explicit way, but more in let's say, by guiding the class in that way as best as I could, and from my own energy, to make the practice or the class about cultivating balance and harmony. So can I move in such a way that I am stimulating myself or pacifying myself, so I come to a more of an equilibrium? And can I then move in such a way that I can maybe play a little bit along this spectrum so that I can become more robustly established in the center? And when I was in my initial years of teaching asana, I would, at the beginning of the class, really we'd do some exercises, maybe with the breath or with sound or with looking at what we're leaving behind the day-to-day, and really kind of making it obvious, not by telling, but by inviting people into the experience, that I can use this practice as a means to connect with more of my whole self. And I can also use it as a type of prayer, as a way of living gratitude, which to me is one of the beautiful things in the Indian tradition, and you still see it in Southeast Asia as well. The way that day-to-day activities like eating and bathing and maybe feeding the birds or whatever it might be, they're still imbued with this very vital quality of gratitude. So for me, Surya Namaskara is a prayer of thanksgiving. So sometimes I might do a workshop and we'll look much more at the symbolism and the different layers of meaning encoded in the movements and gestures of a physical manifestation of Surya Namaskara, but also inviting people into recognition that this isn't about how I'm moving my body. And these bodily movements are really about attuning myself to an attitude that I can then practice all day long. So I always emphasize any yoga technique, whether it's asana or meditation or kirtan, whatever it is, it's just training for the rest of the day. The techniques are designed to help tune us to what it means to be fully here and now, whatever we're doing. So I think let's say the initial primary means that I started to transmit that or share that as best as I could was by inviting people into a holistic experience. So if we're exploring initially through a physical or even an exercise mode, it's done in such a way that it's very recognizant and inclusive of our mind and our emotions and our senses. So to really, because for me that was what I, from my very first experiences, was like, wow, this is a way to invite myself more fully into the here and now. And then to start sharing more mantra and kirtan, and talking about sharing how this is helping us connect to an archetypal quality or capacity that we have. So if we sing to Ganesha, the one that can gather together all the gunners, all the parts of the group, all the members of our being. So talking about yoga as a remembering or a recovery project or a rehabilitation project. And when we're inviting all the members of our being to participate in the practice, it becomes that much richer, that much more healing. And then I also started to give classes in which I'd be using a theme a lot more. So working with the elements, maybe working with an archetype such as Ganesha or Hanuman or Shiva or Mother Divine, and also working with a theme from a text like the Yoga Sutra or from the Gita. So for example, cultivating Shraddha. How can I deepen my self-trust? How can I deepen my own authenticity? And one way is by doing what I say I will do, and by practicing in a way that I'm deepening my self-trust. So if I'm exploring physically, how can I make sure I'm exploring in a way that's appropriate for me today, that isn't based on what the teacher's showing or what my neighbor's doing or what I did last time? And then I started also, when I was in Mysore studying Sanskrit, I started to share kirtan with a lot of foreign yoga students from many countries. And in the kirtans, I would then often, because I recognize a lot of people, it's a quite new practice, and that they haven't had that devotional singing. I think is, for me, my understanding is that basic human culture means we gather together, maybe around a fire, or we gather in a circle and we sing and we dance and we share story. About that's things we've all around the world, but in modern world, many people maybe don't have chance to experience a lot of that when they're growing up. So when I started sharing kirtan, often I would share a story about Ganesh or about Rama or whichever one or two of the archetypes we would sing to. And by that time with Larry, I'd heard so many beautiful stories, and read more as well, and learned from more teachers in India. And then I started giving courses. Then people started asking me to give courses on texts. And by that time, I translated texts with my Sanskrit teachers and spent many years being with the text. And then I started to give courses on Yoga Sutra and on the Gita and on Indian mythology. And then in the last 10 years, the programs are always integrated. So there's always practical yoga philosophy, and there's always elements of kirtan and storytelling, or sometimes we'll take a body of text and study that. So then now it's a bit more explicitly inviting people into an experience of a holistic methodology.
What is it that attracts people to kirtans and mantras?
So, I mean, for me, I can say that.
Sorry to interrupt. Was anything taught to you about this in Kashmir Shaivism, the power of the sound, the syllable?
Yes. So when my first experience of kirtan was at that same time when I began studying with Adrian Cox and Larry Small, and the first time I sang kirtan in Sanskrit, I just felt like, wow, because I'd always enjoyed singing, and I'd sung in many languages and enjoyed singing in many languages, but there was just something different. And that made me think, wow, I just want to do this. I want to keep doing this. I started practicing. And at the same time, Larry had been taught by traditional teachers, so he had some awareness of how to recite various shlokas and some different meters. And then it just happened as well. So I learned, for example, the first recitation of the Shiva Stotravali and chapter 12 of the Gita, I was practicing with Larry around the same time. So I was introduced into the basics of the Sanskrit alphabet. Well, the Sanskrit sound system, more accurately. And then it so happened that an Indian teacher was visiting Bangkok, and he came to visit the yoga studio in Bangkok. This was maybe a year or two later. And he came as a guest, and it just so happened, so one evening there were about 10 of us gathered in this room, and he said, I understand some of you are interested in mantra. And we said, yeah. So do you know the Mahamrityunjaya mantra? And we all said, yes. It's okay, because we'd been taught it. And then he said, okay. And he listened and he said, okay, so let's, and then he taught us it, let's say, properly, and explained what I later understood. He explained the sandhi and explained how we need to place the emphasis and why Vedic mantras need to be recited in a certain way and with a certain preparation. And then I also started studying Sanskrit. I was teaching English at a university, and I started studying Sanskrit with another member of faculty, just one-on-one. And then when I got to India, and the first teacher I studied with there, she would do, she was teaching Sanskrit, but she was also giving classes on Yoga Sutra recitation and Bhagavad Gita recitation. So I stayed in her house for my first 2 visits for a total of about 5 months, during which we were reciting most days. And on the second visit, she handed over to me. So now you can lead the class. But that was really nice, because I'd already had, let's say, some formation, but with her, it was just because it was daily. And then on my next trip to India, I then started studying with the teacher who became my main teacher when I did the master's program. And he's from a Sri Vaishnava lineage. And they've been father to son acharya for more than 700 years. And I had a very, very beautiful experience with on that visit. So I'd been studying with Alwar, who was my main teacher. And we were doing second chapter.
From Melkote?
Yes. So Lakshmi Tadacharya from Melkote, you know him?
Yeah, another person said they'd learned from him.
Yeah. So I was studying with Alwar mainly, but a good friend of mine who'd been doing a PhD in Mysore, Lakshmi Tadacharya had basically been her mentor. And so I'd met him through her. We'd been studying with Jayashri together, and Jayashri is also his student, and I think distant relation. But I started studying with Alwar, and I was going to the house once or twice a day. And one evening I arrive at the house. Alwar's a big man. He kind of fills the door. So he opens the door and he said, today James' father will take the class. I think, oh, wow. I go into the room where he receives visitors, and he's sitting on his cot, and he invites me to sit down on the floor. So he says, oh, what are you doing? So I says, oh, we're doing second chapter of Gita. He says, very good. How many verses have you done? 7. Recite them. So I begin, and he's not satisfied. And at least for the next 90 to 100 minutes, he was 74 or 75 at the time. Lakshmi Tatacharya, these first 7 verses, we practiced them together. And he says, look at my mouth, watch my mouth. And then he got to a point where he was satisfied. He taught me, we did the next verse. And then he said, okay, so it's very good you are studying the Gita. But you must promise me, James, we will not accept any money from you. Your Guru Dakshina is that you must learn it properly, and then you must share it wherever you go. And he says, when I say learn it properly, maybe I need to explain, because you're British, and you British don't know what education is. You came here and destroyed our education system. He says, like, you have an exam, you know the date, you know the time, you know how long the exam will be. You can even look at last year's question papers. This is not an exam. In our system, you never know when the teacher's going to give you the exam. That's how you find out if you know it. And you cram for an exam, yeah? That's not education. Education isn't cramming in. Education is drawing out what's already inside. And that's what our tradition was all about. But he says, when you're studying the Gita, the idea is you need to install it into your own hard drive with the auto update facility. So he says, this is actually the same Gita Press edition that I I had at that time. He says, so when you've studied the Gita, you can give this book away because you've installed the verses into your very being. So you know them by heart, not by rote. Not that you can just like, okay, recite them in a rote way, but that you can call upon whichever verse you need whenever you need it. And so they placed great emphasis on the correct pronunciation. And he also explained, that they have the idea that if you study 100 verses traditionally, then you become a pundit. Because if you really study the verse completely, looking at all of the different permutations and all the different grammatical features, all the linguistic and poetic features, and then all the different allied content that you can associate with the words and the images, then it will take you into that deeper understanding of Sanskrit, which is something I'm still very far from. But studying the text with them was very inspiring because it really encouraged me to, as I'd also had from my initial teachings with Larry and through this Kashmiri Shaiva lineage, is that these are teachings to be lived and practiced. And that when one studies the text, like Larry explained when we were studying Yoga Sutra, the traditional way of teaching means you practice the teachings. It's like you look at the text, you work with in a small group, and then you explore, then you put to the test. So there was that great emphasis on correct pronunciation and, let's say, conscious practice of mantra. I think some people are attracted to mantra because they think it's kind of sexy, or they think it's going to give them special powers. But I think more fundamentally, I think people are attracted because it is we are vibrating beings. And for me, I feel that the sound-based practices, what I often tell people is that yoga is practical. And the Indian tradition recognized that we are vibration. So sound-based practices are treasured because people understood, the rishis understood the power of sound and know that it can reach the parts that other techniques aren't easily. And it invites yoga right away because we sing with our bodies and our energy, and our mind is involved, our senses are involved, our emotions are involved. And I think there have been now scientific studies to prove that when we gather together and sing, it's tremendously healing. They say just singing is healing, but when we gather in a group and sing, this is also healing. So I think spiritual traditions have known this all over the world since the beginning of time. And I think people are really hungry for that. I have this sense that people are so hungry for so many of the things that we've known for thousands of years, but somehow certain modern tendencies of distances from these wonderful inheritances. And I feel the great opportunity of the yoga tradition is that it is a vital living tradition. So it's only survived for thousands of years because it has this adaptability. Its frame is so robust, it's so anti-fragile that it's already stood the test of time. So it allows for this application to all sorts of challenges, but rooted in something that's very, very robust and thoroughly tested. I don't know if I gave enough of an answer about mantra.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I've taken a lot of your time already. But in conclusion, could you please sing something for us? Or
yes. How long would you like? Because, for example, I could recite something.
Your personal favorite.
Well, actually, normally I like to sing the Aditya Hridayam every day.
How beautiful.
And this morning I had an early Skype call with a friend in Israel. I'm supposed to be going to teach there in June, but with this current health situation, we're just not sure. And with the time difference, we had an early call. So I didn't recite Aditya Hridayam yet today. So if you like, I could recite that.
Wonderful. That's such a blessing. Absolutely.
Okay. So I'll sing, I'll do a short invitation to Ganesha and to Shiva, and then I'll go into the Aditya Hridayam.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aparna. Yeah, it's a pleasure to talk about this type of content. So. Om Gananam Tva Ganapatigam Avamahi Kavim Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmana Brahmanaspata Anashan Vanmurti Saranam Om Gam Tat Purushaya Vitmahi Vakratundaya Timahi Tannorandif Prachodayati Om Ganganapataye Namah. Om Ganganapataye Namah. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Om Namaste Astu Bhagavan Vishveshwaraya Mahadevaya Triambakaya Tripurantakaya Trikagnikalaya Kalagnirudraya Neelakantaya Mrityunjayaya Sarveshwaraya Sadashivaya Shriman Mahadevaya Namaha. Om Ata Shri Valmiki Ramayani Aditya Hridayam Stotram Tato Yutta Parishrantam Samare Chintaya Stitam Ravanam Chagrato Drishtva Yuttaya Samupastitam Daivataischa Samagamya Drashtamapyagatoranam Upagamya Bravidramam Agastyo Bhagavan Rishihi Rama Rama Mahabaho Shruno Guhyam Sanatanam Yena Sarvanarinvatsa Samare Vichaishyasi Aditya Hridayam Punyam Sarvashatru Vinashanam Jayavahan Japannityam Akshayam Paramam Shivam Sarvamangalamangalyam Sarvapapapranashanam Chintashokaprashamanam Ayurvarthanamuttamam Arashmemantan Samutyantan Deva Suranamaskritam Pujayasva Vivasvantam Bhaskaram Bhuvanishwaram Sarvadevatmakohesha Tejasvi Rashmi Pavanah Yesha Deva Suraganan Lokan Patikavastibihi Yesha Brahma Cha Vishnuscha Shivaskannah Prajapatihi Mahindro Ranadahkalo Yamasomo Hyapampatihi Pitaro Vasavasadiya Ashvino Maruto Manuhu Ayurvanif Prajah Prana Ritakarta Prabhakara Aditya Savita Surya Kagaf Pusha Gavastiman Swavarna Sadrishopanu Riranyarita Rivakara Haridashvasahasrarachis Sapta Saptir Marichiman Timiron Matanashambustvashtamartanakum Shuman Hiranyagarbhashishirastapanoskaroravihi Agni Garbodite Putra Shanka Shishiranashana Vyomanatasthamopedi Rikyajusamaparagah Kanavishtira Pamitro Vinyaviti Blavangamaha Atapi Mandari Mityaf Pingar Sarvatapanaha Kavir Vishvo Mahatija Rakta Sarva Pavudbhavaha Nakshatra Grahataranam Adipo Vishvabhavanaha Tejasam api tejasvi dvarashatman namostute Namah purvaya giraye Paschimaya drayi namaha Jyotir gananam patayi dinaripatayi namaha Jayaya jaya bhadraya hariyashvaya namo namaha Namo Namah Sahasram Sho Adityaya Namo Namaha Nama Ugraya Viraya Sarangaya Namo Namaha Namah Padma Prabodhaya Prachandaya Namostute Brahmeshana Suraya Rityavarchase Basvati Sarva Bhakshaya Rodraya Vapushi Namaha Amokhnaya Himakhnaya Shatrukhnaya Metatmani Kritaknaknaya Devaya Jyotisham Patai Namaha Taptachami Karapaya Haraye Vishvakarmani Namastamo Biniknaya Ruchaye Lokasakshini Nashayati Shai Putam Tameva Sridati Prabhu Ayati Shatapatyesha Varshatyesha Gavastibihi Yesha Suptesha Jagarti Bhutesha Parinishchitah Yesha Chivagnihotransha Varan Shivagnihotranan Devascha Kritavaschiva Kratunan Paramivache Yani Krityani Lokesha Sarvesha Paramaprabhu Yenama Patsu Kritresha Kantaresha Paishache Kirtayan Purushah Kaschin Avasirati Raghava Pujayasvainamekagro deva devam jagatpatam Yetatrigunitam japtva yuddeshu vichaishyati Asming shani mahabaho Ravanam ranjayishyasi Evam muktva tatogastyo jagamasayatagatam Yetat mahateja nashtashoko bhavattara Dharayamasa suprito ragavav prayatatmavan Arityam preksha japtveram param harshamavaptavan Triracham yashuchir bhutvaranurādāya viryavan Aravanam preksha rishtatma jayartam samupagamati Mahata Bhavati Ataraviravaran Niriksharamam Muritamanaf Paramam Rarishyamana Nishicharapati Sanshayam Viritva Suraganamathyagato Vachasvareti Om Tatsareti Shri Valmiki Ramayani Aditya Hridaya Stotram Sampurnam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aparna. So that's one of my favorite recitations. It's interesting. Swami Laxmanju, there's a very beautiful longer hymn called the Samba Panchashika, which is included in the Havan ceremony when we sing many hymns, and is one of the hymns that he also enjoyed singing and recommended singing. But he also, one of his closest devotees who I met in Kashmir, Swami Laxmanju had told him to recite the Aditya Hridayam for his health, for his physical health. And this man had said to him, yes, but knowing what I know because of you, I don't need to worry about my body. And when I met him, he was in his 80s. He had Parkinson's disease, and he says, now I wish I had recited the Aditya Hridayam every day, like Swamiji told me, instead of just reciting the Shiva Sotravali, and which was the one that he also emphasized for this particular devotee. And then when I went to study in India as well, Jayashri, this was in the recitation book she used with those Yoga Sutra chanting classes. They also recited Aditya Hridayam. And for me, the sun is, it's one of my favorite topics to teach, yoga in the sun. I think that's also a lovely way that it can help people who maybe feel a little bit uneasy when things that are to do with religion are talked about, because the sun is such a wonderful universal archetype and symbol, and also physical reality we can all relate to. So if you are from any spiritual or religious background, or if you are maybe just, you have more, let's say, scientific orientation, then the archetype of the sun, I find it one that can cut through those barriers and also highlight a lot of the commonalities between different traditions. And yeah, I mean, you can talk like, that's one of my favorite archetypes, and there's so much we can do with it. And in these times of various health issues, then taking that time to connect with that healing, nourishing energy, I think is a really powerful and affirmative practice for us all to stay connected to as best as we can.